Welcome back to the Sermon on the Mount video. It'll be an overview of your assignments for week 9, the week after spring break. And also it will be some comments on the passage in Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34. So we want to start off with the assignments and talk about them just a little bit, very briefly. What we will be looking at on your Wednesday assignment would be your translation of that passage, Matthew 6, 25 through 34. You'll want to follow the grading rubric, as you always do in that translation. And then, of course, we will have a group report this week from one of the groups, and it will be due on Friday night. Your individual translations on Tuesday night by midnight. Your group translation and the whole project is due on Friday night. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. And then the individual assignment, which has the phrasing and exegesis and sermon outline, will be due on Saturday night. Also, you will have, if you're not in the group, you will also have a report, a response on the discussion board to the group report that is done for this week. So do good work as you normally do, and if you have any questions about it, certainly don't hesitate to give us a call. Now I want to turn, if we might, to the passage itself. And the first thing I'd like to do is just point out just a few words to you. Then there are a couple of concepts that I want to give you toward the end of our discussion. But we're starting with verse 25. There's a word that he uses that is translated don't worry or don't be anxious or something like that. It is merimnate. Take a look at that word, see what it means to you, see what it comes out, what you come out with. Also, let's see, there would be a couple of metaphors in here, but there's one word in verse 26 that means to gaze at or to consider. It's emblepsate, and so you want to look at the origin of that word and the construction of it with the preposition, and then maybe do a word study on that as well. Then we'll talk about some of the other concepts, really, rather than just looking at words down there. But we will take a look at some of those in a little bit in our comments. But as we look at this passage, what I want us to do is to note what Jesus is talking about here, as we usually do, because for Jesus, of course, has been talking all along in this section about practicing righteousness. And he's still talking about that because that's, of course, what he has created us to do and changed us to do, so that we might live righteously and have a surpassing righteousness, as he talks about it. I remember reading a story many years ago about a man who was immigrating to the United States from Europe. And so he had finally saved up enough money to buy a passage on a ship so that he could come to the United States. Problem was, he didn't have any more money. He was out of money. That's all he had. And he knew that if he got on the ship and he had to buy food, then he would certainly not be able to afford it. And so what he did, he went to the store and he bought him a lot of cheese and crackers. And so he would, every day at the meal times when the other people were going to the restaurants and so forth on the ship, he would hide somewhere and he'd eat some of his cheese and crackers. He did it all the way across the Atlantic. And then as they neared the United States, finally, one of the stewards on the ship found him or saw him as he ate his cheese and crackers. And he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I couldn't afford to buy meals in the restaurants. And so I came down and I eat my cheese and crackers. I had to do it because I'm ashamed of it. And so I just eat my cheese and crackers." And he said, "Well, man, don't you realize that when you paid for your passage on the ship, that you paid for 3 meals every day? You could go to any of these restaurants and you could eat your meal as a part of the price that you paid for your passage." That story's always stuck with me because it kind of describes how we sometimes are as we think about trying to provide for ourselves rather than trusting God. We worry about things, we fret about things, and we try to figure out these things for ourselves. Man normally has 2 worries. One about the things that are necessary for life. There's some legitimacy to that because, we have to have food, especially if you're providing for your family, you need those things. So you do get concerned about those things. And then we also worry about things that make us comfortable, things that we want, things that we desire. And so we try to provide these things for ourselves. The point that Jesus is making here is if we're going to practice this surpassing righteousness in our behavior, then we need to make sure that instead of worrying about trying to figure things out for ourselves, we would, in the place of that, we would have faith that God would take care of our needs, that He would give us those things that are necessary for our life, and He would give us those things that make us comfortable as we think about that. So He says, what you need to do is, as you look at this situation, as He describes it, He starts off in verse 25 by saying, "Don't worry about what you will eat or drink," because He said, really you can't make all of that happen. But really what you want to do is to make sure that you are checking out the birds of the air, for instance. Just listen, look at how God takes care of them. I was at one of my son's house a couple of weeks ago, and they have a bird feeder right outside their window by their table where they eat. And it's really fascinating to me to watch that, to see the different kinds of birds that come, but to see them as they come and find this food provided for them. And I noted that sometimes they're kind of messy eaters, and they'll throw seed with their beak, they'll throw seed off on the ground. But the thought that struck me as I watched that the other day was, here the birds seem to be wasteful, and yet even in that practice, God is providing for those ground feeders that feed not up in the bird feeder, but down on the ground. And the point that He's making here is that that's what God does, that He takes care of the needs of His people. And so He uses these 2 pictures here. One is having food to eat, and the other is having clothes to wear. And what He says is, look at the birds of the air and see how God takes care of them. The birds can trust Him for everything that they need. Look at the flowers of the field, the lily of the field specifically is what He talks about. And see the beauty of that flower and understand that it does not create that beauty on its own, but rather God provides for that. In fact, the point that He makes here is that even Solomon in all of his glory couldn't dress like that. He couldn't provide clothing like that. Only God could do that. So He says, Don't worry about things like that. Don't worry about those things. Man is the crown of God's creation. That includes women too. Of course, that's a generic statement, but what he's trying to say is that people belong to God, and God is going to take care of our needs. So when we're in our right mind, what we do is keep our focus on Him. We don't worry about trying to provide everything for ourselves, but we trust in Him. We keep our focus on Him, and He does provide the things, the daily things that we need, and He provides all of those things that are necessary for our life. So our focus should not be on the material and how to provide it, but our focus should be on trusting Him and walking with Him. Just remember the cheese and crackers. Now, we can't provide for ourselves nearly as well as He has provided for us. And then He says, don't worry. Just don't worry. Worry is a waste of time to start with. But more than that, worry is a violation of God's will, because God does not want us to spend our time fretting about things that we can't change anyway. It also is a violation of common sense. If you look back at verse 25, you will notice that when he says that, we don't need to worry about that, because even when you look at the birds of the air, you know that God is taking care of them. And so if God's going to take care of them, certainly He's going to take care of us. It also is a waste of time to worry. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't make yourself any taller. You can't make your hair any longer. You can't make your hair grow in any rate. And so he says it is a waste of time. In verse 32, he suggests that even the pagans, even the pagans understand this and know this. And for us to worry would be to act like the pagans act. And then in verses 26 through 30, he says it is an insult to God, because we are His creation. We are the crown of His creation, and He certainly is going to provide for our need. If a father is going to take care of his child, if a mother is going to take care of her child, certainly God is going to take care of us. But then worry is a lie as well, because what it says is that the greatest need that we have is physical. The greatest need that we have is not physical. The greatest need that we have is spiritual and our relationship with God. So worry is the opposite of childlike faith. And what he's trying to point out to us is that you can't have childlike faith and worry at the same time. If you trust in God, I mean, just like kids, little kids don't worry about what's going to happen when lunchtime comes or when dinner time comes. They depend on their parents to do so. And in the same way, with the same logic, with the same good sense, then that's the way we ought to depend on God for us as well. So he says, let God rule in your heart. Let God demonstrate His surpassing righteousness in you. Remember, He already knows what you need.